Alrighty, we are recording. Welcome everyone to the San Diego Patriots podcast. This is episode 27, and I'm sitting here with my new friend, Mr. Zack Gianino. Did I pronounce that right?
Gianino.
Gianino.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds Italian. Are you?
It's very much
Italian background, or?
Yes, Sicilian.
Okay.
Yeah, family moved to the United States in the late 1800s.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, mid 1800s.
Yeah, and then but you've been born and raised in San Diego, just like myself, right?
No, so actually I was born in Boston, Massachusetts.
Ah, I could sense that in
yeah,
you.
different vibe. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, and moved to San Diego in 2000 with my mom. I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
Feel like those 6 years really rooted me in the East Coast in ways. But since I've been out here for now, I just turned 31 this past weekend. So
yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, so I feel like I'm definitely a local now. And kind of that's where my passions are too. So
yeah, well, and then I mentioned to you, like, I'm born 97, so I'm technically a 90s kid, but I don't remember anything in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like, I don't remember even 9/11, right? But you at least had some memories from the 90s, and I think that does, shape you a little bit different than me, and a little bit different, me a little bit different from someone in 2005 and all that, right?
Yeah, no, even just a couple of years of a difference can kind of change the outlook on society. My being born in 93, I remember, the lights on at nighttime told you to go home, or the street lights, or remember the bikes over at one place is where all the friends were at in the cul-de-sac or whatever, and just things that had to do without a cell phone. So
yeah, definitely a different era.
Definitely, yeah, probably the last one to experience kind of that sort of freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how's your journey been in San Diego? Like, why did your parents even move here? Was that for work or?
Yeah. So, kind of to give a little background, my stepfather, who I actually thought was my real father growing up, passed away when I was 4 years old, which was pretty heavy on me. Again, The Lion King just came out around that time, so I was weird comparables of like Simba and Mufasa and losing a father. But then my mom connected me with my biological father after we moved to San Diego in 2002. He passed away. So my mom, the reason she wanted to move to San Diego was really she woke up one day and said, I want to go to San Diego. It was really like an epiphany. She didn't know how. She didn't know how the finances were going to work. We're not well off. So there was really a lot of challenges that presented my mom. But everything fell into place. It was very smooth, and my mom and I, my grandmother tagged along, and we moved out to San Diego. My mom was tired of the weather. I think wanted to experience a different,
It's definitely a lot better out here.
Yeah, it's a paradise out here, and hard to leave. But she wanted a new opportunity, a new life for her and myself, and I'm very blessed that she made that decision.
Yeah. I could see those events impacting you and, giving you a little purpose to, be a strong man in the family and grow up and build yourself.
Absolutely. I've had to kind of play that role my own. And that's actually, and I'm glad you brought that up, that's actually what led me down the rabbit hole of politics, history, philosophy, all this types of teachings, is because, getting older, you realize, at least I realized, that I didn't have that male influence in my philosophy or my perspective in life. And so my mom did and has done an incredible job filling whatever void she could. But there's just a natural energetic difference when you don't have a male figure or male words or male perspective. So I had to find that through literature. I had to find that through history, through philosophers, through reading about Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Machiavelli, Karl Marx, even though I didn't, it's a different take from that guy. Yeah. But definitely just different male figures throughout human history to kind of give me values that resonated with me. Not that I was looking to take theirs, but to match mine. I felt an urge, an itch, a tick, and a lot of their philosophies, perspectives, and legacies kind of fulfilled something for me.
Yeah, and different aspects of different philosophers resonate with you, right? You may not agree with everything that one person's saying, but you can kind of pick the best from each person, right?
Absolutely. You learn the greats to become greater. And I, picked and chose what felt right to me, and I'm still doing that.
Yeah. I think it's important.
Yeah, it keeps you kind of grounded in many ways. I think today's society, we get lost in a lot of pointless stuff. And I think when you go back to that deep existential perspective, it grounds you and realigns your perspective and how certain things squabble you in distractions when it's like, okay, there's a bigger picture here.
Yeah.
And kind of realign.
Yeah. And so at what age did you start getting into that? Was it like a middle school, high school? You just kind of started to go towards those books, or?
So I got my first kind of urge to pursue purpose in high school. It was my, I would say, sophomore year. I wanted to do psychology. I was very fascinated with the mind, and I felt like I was a really good listener and could speak to people's, kind of help people travel their own mind. And I did that in little friend groups. So I wanted to continue helping people. And so I did that. I was helping with special needs kids and different tasks that the school psychologist was doing. But it wasn't until my senior year government class where we were going over the Constitution in 1 week, which I found strange, which I still find really...
That about sums up the education
Yeah,
system.
if that doesn't explain to you why we're in the catastrophes we're in. No, it was a very quick week, but I took that week very seriously because I knew the Constitution was an important document that we should understand. And it wasn't until we got to the Eighth Amendment, and my teacher at the time was a former lawyer lobbyist from D.C. Now he was teaching high school. And so he was very familiar with how things went in Washington and understood law and all the legalities of things. And so we were going over the Eighth Amendment, and I was like, in front of the class, I raised my hand, still very shy at the time, but I felt the urge to be like, okay, I'm going to ask this scenario. And I said, the older I get, the more I'm losing the exact story, but it was along the lines of like, okay, if this happens and this happens, and then this is what they say, and then this happens, couldn't you administer torture and bypass the Eighth Amendment? And I'll never forget the absolute silence it struck in my class of goofballs and crazy. Everybody was just like, and they looked all at the professor or the teacher, and he was like, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. And it was like that moment was just like, what did I just do? What did I just play through within my mind? And then it was like, oh, this is what lawyers are doing. This is how they're undermining laws.
Yeah.
This is how they're figuring out how the laws can work for them or not work for them. And it's like the interpretations of documents was where it was like, wait, those are subjective, or, those can be just an opinion, but it can define how it's used, right? Like when we look at different, Second Amendment, First Amendment, like where's the lines and how is it interpreted? So that day I went home and I got an early graduation present from my mom, which was an iPad, one of the first iPads.
Very cool.
And I locked myself away, and that whole summer I went down the rabbit hole. Who wrote the Constitution? Why'd they write it? Where'd they come from? Why'd they come here? What'd they do when they came here? Why'd they leave? What were they leaving? Who was it that they left? Why did that person become, just kept on following this rabbit hole, literally.
Yeah, you're challenging it. You're making sure that it resonates with you.
I'm checking the foundations of what I'm taking as why is this important?
Yeah.
Right? What does this do to define my life now and moving forward? And it was just, down, like I said to you earlier, it was that rabbit hole led me to one thing, history, and then learning different styles of government. And then it was like, wait, religion's involved as well. Mm-hmm. And then that was a whole kind of
new level.
Yeah, that was a whole different piece of it. But that moment in my senior high school class really shaped much of how I would live the rest of my life to this moment, because it set off a fire. And that kind of passion is I think it when you have it, but it's hard to explain.
Yeah, and it's unique for every person, right?
Absolutely.
But that is the common denominator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you see a lot of successful adults who are clearly passionate about what they're doing, there is a point in time where they just unconsciously fell into it, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think about someone, I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast the other day, and he's really big into martial arts, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he always talks about how, I never it never seemed like work to me. Like, yeah, it was hard work. I had to exercise and I was getting my ass kicked and all this, but I just loved doing it. And I did it for 15 years and became an expert. And now I teach other people and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you know, and apply the same thing to being a, you know, financial wealth manager, politics, psychology, philosophy. You know, you find your kind of niche and then you pursue excellence in that realm, and you're not working a day in your life technically, right?
Absolutely. And it's, you know, especially in politics, it's very stressful. And if you don't have certain things to keep you centered, it can destroy you. And I've watched it destroy people. I've watched it scare people away. I've watched it do a lot of things. And it certainly takes a reminder of philosophy to keep one, you know, firm and grounded, because it's a wild, it's a wild world out there in politics, especially right now. So yeah, it's
gotten hostile over the past few years, I believe, right?
It's ticked up. It's been a gradual thing. And, you know, not to sit here and be like, you know, both sideism, but it really is. Both sides have become sharp in their vitriol and have created a platform or an environment where, you know, in order to even have an adequate conversation, you have to like cut through all of the associations or assumptions or presumptions and all of this crap that has, for me, a lot of the time, nothing to do with me, nothing that I've said, nothing that I believe in. But I still have to like cut through it to even have that real conversation. And I think that's something people just don't even want to do. Because that's effort.
Well, and that's I always talk about Marxism, right? So that's actually a product of Marxist ideology. So viewing everyone in terms of their group, you're just a puppet for your group. You're not, you know, Zack the individual who has his own thoughts and opinions. You're white guy.
Yeah.
Well, all white guys think this way. You're conservative. All conservatives think this way. And it can happen on both sides, right? You view, you know, someone else who's shaking their fist in the air for social justice, and it's hard not to immediately assume they're a full-blown communist, you know, and I fall prey to that myself. So it's important to think like, you know, think of the individual, right? It's sovereignty of the individual, not the group, right?
And that's what a lot of philosophy in my life has reminded me of, is the individual, and how an empowered, strong, educated individual creates a more prosperous collective. And I think that's how for me, that's how I always articulate to people that are collectivists, is that strong individualism is the best form of collectivism you can have, because you have not just self-reliance, self-governance, but the ability to now go outside of yourself, because your house is in order. Now you can care about others. If your internal house is a mess, but you're sacrificing it all for the greater good, the greater good usually is not a good at all. It's usually a crappy situation that turns out worse for everybody. So it's way, and I was on the speech and debate team in college, and that was one thing that I benefited a lot from, was that perspective and understanding, like, where are they coming from? Where are people coming from? And understanding that there are so many similarities, and not just in the philosophy itself, but how you articulate it. How can we accomplish something that we both care about, that your approach may be different, but this approach still accommodates your want. And it's just teaching people different alternatives.
Well, and it's you know, from what I can take away from you, it's a sense of empathy, right? And I think there's a lot of people who get into the world of politics or psychology, like myself, who, you know, you grew up wanting to help other people and wanting to understand how they tick, right? And like naturally you end up going in those realms and fields, but it's important that you're understanding that trait. That way you can continue that and not just get into these heated political battles and think that this person who disagrees with you is the complete enemy and will bring the world
Evil.
towards hell.
Exactly. Right. No, you're absolutely right. And that's something that we, you know, you hear people talk to each other, or how they talk about each other, calling them evil or
the enemy.
Enemy, and it's like, bruh, like, they're your neighbors. Yeah. Like, stop it, knock it off, because it's almost like we need adults in the room, because now the kids are taking over the classroom and it's becoming nonsense. You've got people are saying things that don't even make sense. Yeah. And it's like, then they, because of their pride, they double down on it. And it's like, you're doubling down on nonsense. What do we do? Where are we at?
Yeah, it's not productive, right?
No, it's completely counterproductive.
Yeah, and I think you know, I've shifted my theme of my podcast, right? But one of the main themes is patriotism. Like, clearly, right? That's the new title of my. Oh, I love the socks. I'll have to get a pair of that myself, actually. But patriotism is a big theme for me, because we're in freaking California. Like, I think conservatives are outnumbered 1-4, 1-5, with liberals, progressives, however you want to call it, left versus right. But, at the end of the day, even if we disagree, we're both American. And that should be something that brings people together. Like, I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your race is, your fucking, who you sleep with. Like, being American is do whatever the hell you want as long as you're not hurting other people. And then don't impede that on me. Don't force that on me. Don't make me change. That's being American. And at the end of the day, we do have these kind of petty arguments sometimes with people on the other side of the aisle. But guess what? There's non-Western terrorists out there who want to cut your fucking head off, and they don't care what your politics are. They just see you as an American, and they see you as the oppressor in their Marxist worldview. So it's like we have real enemies that we need to fucking get over our differences before we have another 9/11 style attack happen, in my view.
You bring up a great point, and that's, again, why my fascination with international relations was so huge, is because we can yell and mudsling at each other all we want, but there are literal empires, civilizations, other cultures and countries and nations that are on a completely different ticking element, and they don't view our drama relevant. They look at us all the same. And the fact we don't look at ourselves in any, we've gone further and further away from looking at each other as like the same in any respect. This is the stuff that Abraham Lincoln warned us about. We would never fall to an outside adversary. We'll fall from within. And that's what really concerns me, is that as a country like us that is so reached around the world, if we implode, that's not just bad for us. That's bad for many countries around the world, even despite some people in the United States saying that the United States being removed from everywhere is going to be a benefit. Unfortunately, respectfully, those people are not aware of the world. And I think in my own career and my current job, understanding that, for instance, the military is not just ammo and guns and shooting, right, or and killing, right? Our military is tasked by other countries to facilitate commerce so that their boats don't get destroyed or hijacked, right? And we provide services all around the world to do these things. And so when people look at, the United States around the world or what we're doing, it's like, there's certain things we should not be a part of. But to say all or nothing, that's dangerous. At that point, you're saying, okay, China and Russia, we fully trust all of your decision making, because they're the superpowers right now, and there's a balance that needs to figure out how it's going to mesh, but we cannot eradicate ourselves from the picture, which a lot of people advocate for.
In my view, the Western way of life, we're a lot more moral, whatever that means for you, compared to China, compared to Russia. So it's like, who do you want on top dictating things? And I always bring the example of, like, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa right now, that's the fastest growing economy. China is all over them now. And you see, it's like, okay, we actually have, child labor laws, and we don't want, large entities or organizations using their power and resources to exploit people into slaves. China doesn't care about that. So, so hey, you can bash on the U.S. all you want. Who would you rather have dictating and growing the economy in Africa, us or China? And
it's very clever the way, and this was something that I took great interest in when studying in college, was, how did the Chinese move? How did they operate on the global platform now that they are on the global platform? Neocolonialism is something that I don't think enough people here in the United States understand. A good example is when Obama was president. Everyone remembers him going to Africa, right? There was a trip where he went and he was saying hello to everybody and everyone. It was a big deal. And people were like, oh, that's where like birthism came up. All this like just this mudslinging. But on an international level, forget Obama. The United States was in Africa competing with China. And it was us saying, buy American, work with America. At the same time, the Chinese were already moved in and fighting for the African continent. And how does China do it? They build all of your bridges. They build your roads. They build your hospitals, your schools, your fire departments, your police departments. They build all the infrastructure for the African countries, for each of the different nations they do partnerships with. However, it's not yours. It's China's. China owns the roads. It's all China's infrastructure, and they employ Chinese people in these African countries to do the work. So you're not even providing labor or economic stimulus. You're building infrastructure, but that's like you're just taking over the land, especially when you call it yours. So China's moving in a very different 21st century way that I think the United States needs to be aware of, because they are making leaps and bounds by doing that in a way that doesn't compare to the pillaging that's happened in the past.
Yeah. That rings a bell for me, because we were talking about this earlier, but that's where that philosophy comes in, which is kind of that deeper layer underneath politics, right? In the Western way of life, we care about the sovereignty of the individual. And that translates even with the United States going to Africa. We want to help them build their own economy and society, versus China wants to come in and basically just adopt them underneath and then bring in their resources, employ their own people to where they can, build it up, but under their full ownership. That's a totalitarian state. That's a communist state. I'm trying to, for the viewers, separate the Chinese philosophy compared to the Western philosophy, and why our philosophy is, my view, superior.
Yeah, and just to push back on a little bit of that, where we falter is we trust figureheads to do the bidding for the country, and we allocate billions of dollars to in financial aid to these countries that don't have infrastructure but have a military and have guns and ammos and despots and dictators, and then we fund them. And they don't give the resources to the new schools or the bridges or help the people. So, yeah, we may have the idea of wanting to help these countries, but we're not taking that approach that China is, which is building out the infrastructure so that any money facilitated into it has a neat system structure to. Yeah. Whereas, like, if we're just throwing money into an anarchist freaking type of country, it's not going to go to the children and the women and the schools and the hospitals. It's going to go to the militias and the military. And so we have to get better on how we engage Africa. And I think that's, again, you have to approach it without trying to dominate them. Because as things progress and as things evolve, so do they. Yeah. So do their countries, so do their governments, so do their philosophies. And they're probably not going to take well to us coming in and telling them what's going to happen. Although the Chinese have done it in a very strategic way. Yeah. It's just, it's not simple. And I think when we look at it, glossing over it, we make a lot of mistakes. But
yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. I know one of the major topics I wanted to talk to you about was what you studied in college, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but you were studying South Asian politics, and then that kind of got you in the realm of North Korea, and maybe if you can walk through that, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so after doing my undergrad at Grossmont College, I transferred to UCSD to do just my upper division, and so I had to make those decisions of where I wanted to hone in. Do I want to be spread out and be a generalist, or do I want to be a little more specific in somewhere that I can understand more deeply? And when I looked at it, I looked at what's the future, what is the future international conflict with the United States, and who's the biggest challenge? Yeah. To me at the time, and I still think today, it's China. And so taking my attention to that part of the world was already a no-brainer. But then it was like, what part of that? What part of that continent and area of Asia did I want to study? China. Well, Southeast Asia, and that whole, the Philippines, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, even Hong Kong and Taiwan, right? All of those dynamics and those elements, each with their own histories, their own claims,
strengths, weaknesses.
Yeah, their strengths, weaknesses, attitudes. It to me was a hot spot, especially when you look at, if you know about the island disputes. There's certain islands out in that area where 6 countries claim it. Russia, China, Japan, and the Philippines all have sort of a level of claim to it.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, and there's a couple of those. There's one that has multiple countries, but then there's a couple that are just disputed between Japan and China. And so there's a lot of, dynamics again that you historically have to be aware of to understand why is there tension here.
Yeah.
And it's over land territorial disputes. And then when you understand like Vietnam and the history, or in South Korea, the Korean War, what happened between those two? What was going on? And then you understand proxy wars. Well, what's that? Well, that's when two larger countries are funneling and facilitating miniature wars, right? Where they use local communities to
Kinda
fight.
like the Cold War a little bit,
Exactly.
right?
It's exactly that. So, that was demonstrated in Vietnam. That was demonstrated in Korea. That was, so that to understand where we're at today, you've got to learn the history of all that. And then when you understand all the history, it's okay, where are we today and where are we going to go? And then it's, well, let's assess the types of governments we have. And that's where comparative government comes in. And that's what brought me to North Korea. And as a fan of dystopic novels, dystopic movies, liking those kinds of like adrenaline, like government, crazy history and fiction, North Korea stood out very, very sharply. I don't think people quite understand just how that civilization views itself, how the people view itself, how they understand reality. It differs so drastic to really anywhere on the planet, regardless of religious perspective. The cult of personality surrounding the Kim Jong-un and his family, and basically how they view themselves on the planet is very like chosen people in a sense.
Yeah, and what they're learning in school from a young age, and even up to adulthood, what you're allowed to say out loud, what you get in trouble for communicating.
It's so drastically different. And a good example in a current example, the state of California passed AB 1955, which basically we could go deep into, but basically it is declaring the state of California will not inform parents on specific information about their children, right? Now, this may seem innocent to some. It certainly doesn't to me. But it may seem as like, we want to make sure we protect the kids and whatnot. What we're beginning to encroach on is exactly the philosophy that North Korea has had for decades. And that is that children, when they go to school, they trust the state with their life, future, everything, more than they trust their parents. And so when their parents criticize the state, question Kim Jong-un, or make any type of inflammatory remarks, do you know where the kid goes? Straight to the state officials to tell on their parent.
Yeah.
And what happens to the parent, depending on the severity of it, could be death, which happens, or it could be some serious reprimanded,
slave labor.
Yeah, and it's like there's a whole generation of people that are taught to tell and snitch on their parents. And when you let the state gain that kind of authority over the parental household, I mean, you're destroying like you're taking a knife even further into the nuclear, further into the parental rights. You're destroying really what made this country even a possibility. The strong households that were able to weather turmoil and not depend on government to take care of us. And
the Western tradition, whether you call it Judeo-Christian, however you want to phrase it, but they do embody that the best, incubator for a human is the family structure, right? Father figure in the home, mother figure in the home. Not every child gets to experience that, right? Like yourself.
Yeah.
But that's the ideal that we try to aim for and strive for.
And even someone that didn't experience that, I still came to the understanding that was important and that is important. And I look to do that and be that in my own life because of where it led. My mom did a good job at keeping me. Statistically, I should be in prison or dead, right? A single child from a low-income Section 8 parent that went through a lot of turmoil early on. And, like, my statistics are not traditionally positive. But it kind of taught me where having that structure is so important. And seeing other friends that had support systems or structures. And that's why I appreciate my mom as much as I do, is because I saw her overcompensate in ways where it's like that's not natural, right? And I think there is a natural element here that this type of policy or this type of approach just takes a dagger straight into, and that should be horrifying.
Yeah.
So I look at North Korea as a way of balancing kind of the extremes of government and sort of the beginning symptoms here, because people think, oh, it's not going to happen overnight. Well, nothing happens overnight. North Korea didn't happen overnight. And so to see it gradually occurring, I always bring up the example is a lot of people, when they look at a timeline, their timeline, wherever they're living, they're mostly looking at it through the lens of this. They're not, they're seeing what's just in front of them and maybe what's just behind them, and they're sort of focusing in where they're at. Where I've looked at and where I've been trained to look at is kind of the larger scope. Where are we at today because of the last 50 years, 100 years, 200 years? Where are we at today, based on what we have today for the future? And so seeing kind of the full timeline by looking at history and paying attention is horrifying. And I think a lot of people are scared of politics because they start to embark on conclusions that kind of are scary.
Yeah. So that few comments there. So one, I know I always bring up Jordan Peterson, right? And Jordan Peterson, who I think is pretty central in my view, right? And he always talks about, criticizes both sides in any way that he can. But he always talks about, the left versus the right, right? And philosophically, you have your right wing, your conservatives, right? These are folks who do look at the past couple thousand years and try to determine, okay, what ideas worked well to improve the human experience? Now, how can we conserve that?
Yep.
That's how I view it, right? And then you have your left wing who says, hey, based on these existing institutions and ideas, there's still errors here. There's still people suffering. Like, we need to challenge those existing institutions, and you need to have that ongoing dialogue between the left and the right to work out these problems. You can't just come in and, again, when I always say, the leftists, right? Which I don't even know if that's considered a bad term or not. But, today, those are the people who were like, no, like, we're doing things all wrong. Like, no, we need to completely change how the United States is run. We need to and that's why these are the revolutionaries who are trying to defund the police and do all this crazy stuff, who challenge the nuclear family and who think, well, no, again, there's too many problems here. So, the U.S., we've done things wrong, whatever. So, so it's funny that you mentioned that, because just reminds me of Jordan Peterson and his take on, like, you need to literally look at things in a big picture and in a small picture, depending on the situation. And the second comment, I don't know if you know Dennis Prager.
Yeah.
So you've probably heard of PragerU.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a founder of PragerU. He's probably mid-70s, Orthodox Jew.
Oh, wow, okay.
He had a popular radio show in L.A., talking about religion. And he's like, hey, I don't even care if you're religious. Like, I'm just giving this perspective, and tries to, of course, wants more people to go to church and stuff and all that. But I really resonated with a lot of his work because back in the 70s, during the 60s and 70s, during the Cold War, he specialized in communist studies. So he was really into politics and religion and theology, but he put an emphasis on communist studies. And so he always talks about this breakdown between the left versus the right. And you see all these similarities between these communist totalitarian states, whether it's Russia, China, or North Korea, and they do the same thing. They target the nuclear family and try to break it up. They try to go to the kids and say, no, your parents don't know what they're talking about. The way of the past has created all these problems. Like, we need a revolution here. Trust us. We're the ones who's going to bring the utopia, right? Whether or not it's even possible.
Yep.
So it's just interesting you say that, because, we are in California with that, again, I'm not super educated when it comes to this stuff, but when I hear about those policies like that start to shift the power away from the parents to the state, I'm like, wait a sec, didn't they do that in China? Didn't they do that in North Korea? Like, Cambodia, all these places. So, curious, does that align with, do you agree with that? Like, anything to add there?
I mean, absolutely. And that's, and it's the goal and aim is to articulate that without losing people. Because when you're like, oh, China and North Korea, like, yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get people tuning out when you just jump to that. But again, this comes from a vastly informed perspective on how these things occur over time and how you have to notice the symptoms, right? And we're beginning to show symptoms of a government that looks to own and have more control over its population. It's not a good thing. We think order and keeping things neat and nice is gonna, we're humans, we're not robots. And I think the more we keep pretending like we're humans by trying to control our behaviors without incentivizing it, we're going to see more issues and more people fighting the state as they realize the state's starting to step on toes. And they do it gradually. They'll use different communities to get their works in. But mind you, that work is a state authority. It's not LGBT protection. No. It's state authority. And that's how the state views its role. It's not, the state is just protecting such and such. Today, maybe, but it doesn't take long for a completely different philosophy with that power now to prioritize a different thing. But you've already handed them over the power because it was coming with the LGBT community or whatever, right? Because that was the right thing to do, such and such.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to I'm a very healthy skeptic. I do not trust a single thing.
Yeah.
I will listen to it. I'll be open to it. I'll even maybe take a flyer on it. But my skepticism is immediate. Right away. I don't trust government. I've seen it destroy, torture, abuse, lie, corrupt. I've seen it do everything you can imagine in the most heinous, unpredictable ways. So I just live by being a healthy skeptic. I want the best for my country. I want to improve the country. But I don't trust any of these people that are telling me what they're telling me because I've paid attention long enough and my attention span is pretty significant. It's not, the next kid like Todd Gloria. Our mayor, San Diego, I will never institute surveillance on the population because it unfairly discriminates against brown and black communities. In San Diego, you have my word. He literally implemented the largest surveillance program in the United States for a large city just this year. He completely, not even like, okay, he veered off. No,
yeah, like full 180.
Full 180, completely backtracked on his entire proposal on how he got elected to what? Strengthen the state, strengthen the city, the government, right? And that to me, it's like, for what? Right? We're getting lazy on and going after crime, and now we're relying on surveillance to look at everybody now. Scary direction.
Yeah. And there was something you mentioned there that, again, I think resonates with that whole idea of the individual over the group, right? So when it comes to the individual, if I'm ever talking to people, and I've had some uncomfortable conversations naturally when it comes to politics, with friends, family, whatever. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like, I don't care what your politics are, right? As long as you're not trying to hurt me for having a different perspective, that's good. But when it comes to individualist thinking, it's like, okay, well, I talk to so many people who are like, well, I don't like Republicans or Democrats. I don't like government or military. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Like, you as an individual, do you want lower gas prices, grocery prices, and crime rates, or higher? It's like, well, I want lower. It's like, okay, well, that at least we're starting off on a shared understanding and value. We can argue about how to get there, but we agree. We don't want to live in shit and filth. We don't want machine guns flying through our wall. We don't want our kids getting abducted when they go to school. Perfect. Here's some common ground. Second to that, put politics aside. I always care about philosophy, psychology, right? Like, people are always like, well, the world's going to shit anyway. It's like, well, okay. In some ways, sure. That doesn't mean that there's no, areas to improve it. But like, you as an individual, would you like to be in a better mood more of the time or a worse mood more of the time? Well, I want to be in a better mood. It's like, okay, there's another shared value. Like, I know what I'm like when I'm in a bad mood, and I know what I'm like when I'm in a good mood. I want more of the good mood. Yeah. How can I control that? Not every day is going to be great. Not every week's going to be great. Not every year is going to be great. No. But I at least know that that's the North Star I want to head towards. So now let's come together and discuss and trade ideas and bring in history and politics and figure out how to do that.
Well, you have something that many people don't give energy to having, which is a foundation. And I think when you don't have a foundation, if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything, right? And I think we're in a place where the wrong voices are the loudest. And when there's not a lot of critical thinking behind the people receiving those loud words, it's just blind following. Yeah. And that to me, that is probably one of our biggest threats, is following, the blind leading the blind and not having comprehensive dialogue and just kind of going on that adrenaline or sensation.
You'd really like Jonathan Haidt. He's a psychologist. He wrote a book. He's considers himself on the left, but he's anti-woke. So it's like, I usually like to emphasize that for people. But he wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. Talks about how all these Gen Z kids go to college. They can't even sit still when someone disagrees with them. They must get that teacher fired, right? It's like this phenomenon. And he's a psychologist. He's like, what the hell's going on here, right? Like, I believe in healthy debate and all this stuff. So he always talks about how when social media came out, we all thought, hey, social media, that's awesome. Like, now we can see what people in other countries are doing and share ideas. That is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. One of the negative consequences of social media, which comes from the algorithm and how it's built to kind of keep you addicted. But, if I'm scrolling through Instagram and, I'm like, look at all these social justice warriors. I don't want any of that. Unfollow, don't like, I don't, whatever. Now all of a sudden I'm building this little bubble of my own echo chamber, and, and I can't deal with talking to someone who has a different viewpoint, and I can't even argue my points, and vice versa. You have these people who are all about, social justice, Marxism, and all this stuff, and, shaking their fist in the air, and then they can't deal with me disagreeing with them, right? So it's like we have these echo chambers that just get worse and worse. And one additional, factor that he uncovered through his work, right, because he's a doctor and, researcher, he talks about how over time, the most radical voices are the ones that get rewarded on social media. So you can be out there and be like, no, I don't want any white people to be in my thing. And you see other people who kind of feel that in their hearts, even though they wouldn't say it out loud. And they're like, yeah, I like this person. And then now those people get built up in this massive following. Yeah. And it's like, and then it just gets more and more radical. So as you said, the negative voices have become the most influential in our society because we've let them.
And to speak to the coddling of the mind, I think, I lived that. I really did. At UCSD, I watched that front and center because, again, I was a part of the student government. And when I was running so I was a part of the student government my first year there. And then I ran for vice president for my second year. And a part of my campaign, believe it or not, was desegregation.
Interesting.
Well, what do you mean desegregation? Well, at the time, and I have lost track. It probably is still the way it is. But at the time, there was a huge successful push to segregate housing. You had a pan-African-American floor, only black community. You had an LGBT community, only LGBT community, which I understood a little more, to be honest, which there's still presented issues, but understood that. Only Asian floor, only Hispanic floor, right? They didn't have a white floor, obviously, for obvious reasons. But it was the most bizarre thing to me, who entered UCSD already having gone down a rabbit hole and really appreciating where I was at and my exposure to different cultures and communities and people and challenges. Like I went there to be uncomfortable. I went there to be challenged, to have all of my preconceived notions destroyed in front of my eyes, to feel, ideologically empty so that I could pick up the pieces in a better way. Like I wanted to have that experience, and naturally I wasn't going to because of the way that the student bodies were creating and crafting these separate communities. A part of campaigning for the position, we went to different cultural groups or fraternities, sororities, clubs, all the different factions of the school to get their votes. Well, when I went to go speak to the Black Student Union, I was prevented from speaking. I wasn't even let through the front doors. And to me, I thought I was being trolled or because you're white. They were dead serious. They did not want to hear anything I had to say. They didn't want to hear any of my proposals. And mind you, I was on the slate that dealt in reality, whereas the opponent slate dealt in, we're going to pass a resolution to oppose police brutality. Oh, great. I'm glad your bus still doesn't ride in the right direction. I'm glad your books still are costing you an arm and a leg. I'm glad your life on campus is still shitty because you're voting on these intrinsic values, which we all agree on. But that philosophy of feel good policymaking is translated into actual government.
Yeah.
And these kids that I was opposing back then and challenging back then are working today in these offices. And I knew this back then, which is why I took it serious to oppose them and call them out, because I'm like, you're not done here. Mm-hmm. You're going to take this warped perspective of yours and you're going to trample it right into local office.
Yeah.
And surely they did. But it was this safe spaces, right? I was the one out of 30 students on the student council. It was 30 of us, the associated students of UCSD. I was the one vote against safe spaces. And when I casted my one vote against, every head, including the camera, whoosh, I was on the paper. They took a picture of me on the paper. There was all this attention because I said, no, what do we say? Like, the idea of college is to not have a safe space intellectually, right? You're not in fear of being physically hurt. So knock it off. So the next thing is your fear of what? Ideological challenges. Tough shit. You're at college. I was
that's
very.
what the world's about. You're gonna have your views and perspective challenged.
Good luck going into the real world and then trying, being in a work environment and hearing somebody say something. You're gonna lose your shit.
Yeah.
You're gonna have no way or tools or techniques on how to grapple with that, which you would have learned by having those raw experiences in school, which you decided to shield yourself from.
Yeah.
And that that's causing ripple effects in how we as Americans look at each other. It's like, no, most people are pretty Karl Marx, Howard Zinn on the United States. If you know who Howard Zinn is.
No.
He's an American historian who basically articulated American history solely from the perspective of the oppressed.
Got it.
So it is a helpful perspective to understand power dynamics, and how a lot of it is like immature in its approaches, but it also shows that this philosophy is embedded in a lot of people today. This sincere hatred for the United States, and there are people out here that want to see it burn for its past sins. And Howard Zinn spoke a lot to justifying that sentiment.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people refer to Marxism as a religion, right? Because if we think about politics, it's up here. Religion, theology is down here. So when you start to think like, well, wait, like, black only dormitories, like, isn't that a full 180 from like what we've done before? Like, that kind of just sounds racist today, not letting a white person do this or that. Like, isn't that just racist? And they're like, well, no, it's not racist because, and then they go down some mumbo
white
jumbo.
people can't be racist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole intersectional hierarchy and all that. But the more I studied,
black people can't be racist.
Yeah. So the more I studied, Marxism, the more I understood, like, yeah, it is a deeper level theology on how people, like, presuppositions of the world and what the world is about. And when we think about how that looks at the United States, we can all agree the United States is the most powerful entity that's ever lived and currently exists, right? Even if it's not heading in the right direction in our view, it's still extremely powerful. How the Marxists view the world is powerful equals bad, weak equals good. And you're like, okay, like, this is starting to make sense now. So every time you talk to, a progressive about the United States, they're like, oh, the United States was built on the back of slaves. And it's just like, the only reason we're powerful is because we exploited other people and raped other women and fucking all this crazy shit. And it's like, what the hell? It's like, okay, so I'm just going to make a note on that. Then we go over here and look at, Israel and Gaza. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And I've heard actual, like, popular, leftists, like there's a Dennis Prager video where he reviews a video from Trevor Noah, Trevor Noah, the South African guy. Yeah. So it was like 2 years ago, and he's talking about like, I don't get what people are so confused about Israel and Palestine. Like, Israel has resources and guns and an army.
I saw
and
this.
The Palestinian people, are, live in, bad conditions. They don't have blah, blah, blah. So it's like, this is a no-brainer. Like, Israel's the oppressor. And I'm rephrasing it a bit, but it's like, wow, this starts to make sense where people look, and I've had my arguments with a lot of people about Israel, Palestine,
sure.
And I'm not fucking Jewish. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Muslim. Like, I'm
no skin
literally
in the game.
no skin in the game. I'm just a fucking American. Right. And I'm arguing with these people, and they just can't accept. They're like, well, the Palestinians don't even have an army. So how could this be a fair fight? And it's like, that's actually not the argument. It's like, I agree with you. Israel has more power than the Palestinian people. That doesn't mean if Hamas puts a GoPro on their chest, bombs a couple, schools, and then rapes a bunch of women and celebrates for it, that's not a good thing. Like, that's not a freedom fighter. No. You know what I mean? And they start to rationalize. They start, and I'm, tying this back to what I said about Marxism, that's their underlying first assumption, that powerful equals bad, weak equals good. And that's how they justify someone like Hamas being a freedom fighter or being good or being, it's like, what the hell? How did we get here? And once you start to understand that underlying thinking, it starts to make sense now.
Absolutely. The idea that Marxism has taken on a form above just a political philosophy. It's a way of life. It's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of processing your challenges, issues, your place in life. Marxism explains, right? And you have someone to blame for it at all times, in every direction, for all institutions.
It's like, why leave the border open? Why should we? Well, hey, you're white privilege, man. You were born in the U.S. Like, that's not fair. Yeah, this guy in Venezuela lives in a crappy community. Like, he should get the right to do this, even if it impedes your rights. Well, so wait, how does that work? Okay, guy in Venezuela less powerful than guy in
power
America.
Structure. Always, yeah.
So,
or my favorite is, they didn't cross the border. The border crossed them. You heard that?
I actually have not heard that.
Yeah, and it's a way of justifying immigration and saying, like, they're just on their natural land. Your borders don't mean shit, and they're not. We don't acknowledge your borders. And again, it's a philosophy of looking at the oppressed versus the oppressor.
Yeah. Same thing with homelessness. I was talking to Cole about this, right?
Oh,
it's like, if I look at in California, we got gnarly homelessness, right? It's gotten worse over years. And if we think about, go downtown, we look at a guy who's shooting heroin into his arm, shitting his pants, spitting on people, and he's laying in front of this mom and pop, coffee shop or restaurant. And it's like, okay, who do we prioritize here? Me personally, I think the person who's obeying the law, who's actually contributing to the economy, who's bringing employees on and paying their salary and all this stuff, I prioritize them over the guy who is, sticking heroin in his arm and attacking people and gets arrested every 3 days. But if we apply the Marxist power dynamic, homeless guy, less powerful. Mom and pop owner, even if they're barely paying bills, more powerful. Yeah. Okay, we prioritize the homeless guy. It's like this sick way of thinking.
It's something that I look at as abusive compassion.
Like suicidal empathy, right?
Yeah, it's almost like, no, look at how bad they're at in their life. Let them finish off. Like, let them die out. Let them continue where they're at. And it's like, that's not compassionate. That's not helping anybody. I live in downtown. And so when we hear these debates, like I live it every day. I hear it. I see it.
It's frustrating.
I don't know if I regret it because I like being informed, but I have the Citizen app, which, if you don't know if you know, it gives you all the detail on police reports in your area, pedophiles sex offenders registering in your area. It's a complete intel app for your community. And I was running into these ills on the street on my own, but now I'm getting digital updates as well. And I'm not okay with somebody pulling their pants down and taking a shit on the corner with heroin needles in their pockets and falling over the ground. Like absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's not compassion, and no one will convince me of their being compassionate and letting that just happen. People need consequences, maybe earlier on, but let them, this is like extreme freedom. And this is where, I'm not a full-blown libertarian, laissez-faire completely. Yeah. Because if everybody starts shitting on the sidewalk, our society's quality of life is going to diminish immensely. More diseases, less sanitation. So we have to have certain where we draw the line. No, we're not going to accept that.
Yeah.
No.
We don't accept murder, right? We don't accept child molestation. Well, maybe the modern left does these days.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, we have to draw a line, right? We do need some law enforcement. We do need a border, right? Even if you are a live and let live individual, you can agree you don't want, most of us can agree you don't want children being targeted by pedophiles and all this stuff.
And trafficked. So, I mean, we're one of the trafficking capitals of the world.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you just saw this article came out, I think yesterday. At the Comic Con, they just did a sting and caught 14 traffickers and rescued 10 victims or some crazy huge number happening right under at the Comic Con. And it's like these things are not that group got caught. But you can bet your ass there's 20 other groups facilitating this black market.
Yep.
And, this ties into another law that tied law enforcement's hands, which is going after clear teenagers on the street selling themselves, but out of protection for the LGBT community, we don't want to harass or assume such and such because of what they're doing. When clearly over on Rosecrans, I mean, we know where these areas, these prostitution hotspots are. There's kids walking on the streets, and the cops do not have any now jurisdiction to do anything.
It's like the squatters phenomenon, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's another thing. It's like it's not one or the other. There's laws that make sense for situations when it comes to renter rules, law rights, and land homeowners or landlords. You know, and I have a personal perspective on this as well. It's like, you know, the state is not as cooperative, the county's not as cooperative, and sometimes the landlord's not as cooperative, but they give you a certain amount of days to get out and leave, but they're not helping you with anything else. And so you're kind of like forced to be homeless, but the rest of the system isn't facilitating their part of the bargain. So there's laws that allow that person to like, well, you don't need to leave yet. Wait until certain things come through and then you're out. But then there's people that abuse it and they're like, well, I'm not leaving at all. I'm not even trying to go anywhere else, right? Because those laws are there to protect people that are unjustly being evicted or stuff that's happening in their life, which happens, but it's being abused in such a vile way where you've got people like, you know, someone goes and checks their mail and then a squatter runs in and locks the door and says, it's mine, I'm staying here. And, you know, abusing, finite laws. But yeah, anything can be abused. And I think the live and let live progressive, like, ultra freedom, weirdly enough, is like hurting us.
Yeah.
Because we cannot just let everything. And trust me, I'm a big like you said, do your thing. It's not hurting or encroaching my rights in my life. I really, hats off to you. Yeah. More power to you. But
not in every situation.
Not in every situation. And there's nuances. And I think, again, that's a part of the discourse is getting back to the nuances and not the black and white.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think this would be a good transition because, I mean, we could clearly talk all day about philosophy, communism, Marxism. Sure. I love all that stuff. But I know one of your expertise so far, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, is some of the local politics, right? So I had the pleasure of connecting with you through Cynthia, president of the San Diego Young Republicans, a group that I met 4 or 5 weeks ago at the Trump Biden debate. Were you there?
I did not make that one. No.
Okay.
I've been to the other ones, but yeah, I did not make that one.
Yeah. So I'd been following the page for a few months and, you know, me and my own journey, right? Like I have a job, I have my responsibilities, family. I'm at a point in my life where I want to get more involved in something bigger than myself. And a lot of times, including Jordan Peterson talks about start on the local level, right? It's like, I'm not going to argue about Florida politics because I don't see the benefits of it if those actions pay off or I see the return on it. So local community, I like soccer. I want to help, kids get better at soccer.
Yeah, we just got a freaking team now.
Yeah,
so
we got a team. We have
stuff.
Resources coming in. We have the World Cup coming up. Like one of my, goals is I want to help kids get better at soccer and actually see us win a World Cup someday.
Oh, dude.
Long-term goal.
So awesome.
Right? So that's something I care about. But also I care about people getting their shit together, finding autonomy, having better mental health, right? And I always think like, politics or not, again, I want lower gas prices, grocery prices, crime rates. I want lower suicide rates, mental health. I personally believe that Republican policies at the moment will yield the best opportunity for that to happen. So that's what got me into the San Diego Young Republicans. I met Cynthia, had a great discussion. Met Cole, had a great discussion. He's an awesome guy. And then had the pleasure of meeting yourself. So, walk me through your journey with San Diego Young Republicans. I believe you're involved in a leadership role there. What are you guys up to? And then we can go into some of the local policies that you think are important for the viewers to hear about.
Yeah, so my journey into the San Diego Young Republicans, SDYR, started really right after the onset of the COVID lockdowns.
Okay.
At the time, I was living with 6 other roommates right after college with my first job over in PB, which I moved in way after. Younger kids usually hang out in PB. I was already past that life when I moved there, but enjoyed living there because it was right next to the beach. I was on Garnett.
Of course.
Lockdowns happen. Immediately at this point, 2020, I had run for local office. I ran for city council in Santee in 2018. Got 30% of the vote, didn't win, but won in many other ways. Understanding how it works, making the connections, learning the ins and outs. But, I had I was aware of already kind of how local governance worked. And so when the lockdowns happened, I didn't go complain and cry to the federal government. I didn't really go and cry to the state government. I paid attention to my local government because they were the first line of defense between any federal or state government that tried to enforce something. Well, little did I know, we had a local elected official that was very much enjoying the newfound authority that the county was being granted by the state. So he was going after bars that were fighting it, trying to, having them raided the next morning. He was sending surfers home with $1,000 fines, and
yeah, I mean,
it was just an insane. I mean, even today, if you sit and reflect, it's absolutely batshit crazy. None of it justifies what was happening. None of it is proper governance. All of it is unconstitutional. Much of it got shot down in court when it finally made its way through. Mm-hmm. Didn't make news after it lost in court, but it did, especially with the state. Well, we'll get to that. But so all this chaos is happening, and I felt very, I had a camera, and I was going to the beach, and I was showing people from my Instagram lives or videos, showing people, look, you can sit here, and then 20 feet over here you can't sit here, but then 20 more feet you can sit here.
Kind of pinpointing the
showing
craziness.
All the nonsense. Look, you guys, get out of your house. I know you're told to stay in, but just take some fresh breath of air and look at the nonsense, because it makes no sense. Even if it was aimed at being cleansely and sanitary, it still didn't make any sense.
Yeah, and one comment there. So I always thought hey, COVID, we don't know what this is, mm-hmm. Pandemic, right? Okay, let's lock down for 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks max. But I think after that, Sweden opened back up, Florida opened back up, and they were okay, no one's fucking dying. What you said, the goal was cleanliness and for your safety, right?
Mm.
For your safety, which I can understand, but sure. Just because there was a little bit of pros doesn't outweigh the massive cons.
Wait, what are you sacrificing?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I always looked at it through the lens of what are we giving over that we'll never get back. And that was a period of a lot of stuff we handed over mm-hmm. that I still don't think we'll ever get back. And that gave me the energy at the time to go and record what was happening, have police harass me or us, the people I was with, when we were on the sidewalk, look at we weren't even doing anything, and they came up to us to create, I don't know. They had this authority of them that meant that they felt very brazen in flexing, because there was so much uncertainty at the time. Mm-hmm. So when there's uncertainty, law enforcement usually has that upper hand because they're the rule of law, right?
Yeah.
So seeing all of these things happen, it was essential that I found another mechanism for me to get involved and facilitate sounding the alarms, right? That's something that I've been doing since I was 17. So I wanted to find an organization that would do that. Found SDYR. At the time, there was not much happening, I think justifiably, because everything was closed down. So there was a difficulty in organizing at the time. I was just a regular board member. We had a couple of gatherings, but there wasn't an infrastructure at SDYR for it to be something that really continued unless the people there really did a insane effort on their own, which the president at the time, Morgan, he did. And we did get really a good event that happened. But he was also getting call orders from the military to deploy, and it was being called on other assignments. So he had to hand off SDYR presidency. And at the time, again, I was just a regular board member. Everyone else really faded off on the board. So it was just Morgan and myself. We were the only ones that were SDYR. And from that point, it was Morgan and I were who can we, light this up? I'm a different flavor. I don't know if I'm the right figurehead at the time, but we should find someone that is. And at the time, Cynthia was a superb volunteer on 7 different campaigns and was a voice, a name you always heard coming up. And so it was a no-brainer that she was the first to come that we thought of. And she very much enthusiastically accepted the role. I handed off the presidency to her. And then it was just me and her. and we decided we needed to really build this out and not focus on being warm bodies for anybody or a cheap ATM for someone, but a sustaining infrastructure that allows the continuation of this community, which didn't exist really. It was SDYR started in 2010, but like hasn't had a structure to continue.
Yeah, I remember Cynthia mentioning that,
making it relevant. So we were like, this is the year we do that. So all that happened at the turn of 2022. Because again, like I said, there was a lot of empty periods where nothing was happening. All of this happened at the turn of 2022. Cynthia and I got together. We're like, let's rebrand all of this. So let's pick up. Let's even restructure our hierarchy. So we redid the bylaws, our constitution, our mission statement, redid the graphic on our logo, redid the website, changed everything. We acquired Mariko, who is a staffer for. But I feel like staffer doesn't encompass like how crazy, incredible she is at politicking and organizing and understanding and networking. But she works for Supervisor Joel Anderson for the county. She was friends with Cynthia. She came in. She became the second VP. So that was just president, VP. And then we went out and found the most competent young Republicans at the time we could. And boy, did we get from the ground up. And boy, did we get lucky. People who have worked at the RNC, people who had their own marketing firms. I mean, these are people our age.
Yeah,
and
Cole.
Exactly.
Sharp guy.
Yeah, and wrote an author. So finding all of these just incredible, phenomenal, extraordinary San Diegans that were Republican-minded and wanted to do something fun and change, like that lit a whole fire where I was like, okay, this is my next chapter. I'm going to grow this group as much as I can, bring attention to it, enthusiasm, energy, and I'm going to roll my sleeves up and clap back. I'm tired of being defined as a Republican by Democrats or liberals or leftists or progressives or whatever. I'm tired of them getting to tell us here in San Diego who we are based off of some idiot out in Alabama. Yeah. Enough. We're not the same. There's a spectrum, and we're gonna start declaring it. And so the mission was to start declaring who we are. We're a diverse group of eclectic people from around different walks of life. We have different Republican philosophies, but we're also on the same page when it comes to what we, like you said, those fundamental conversations of what we want. We don't want people shooting bow and arrows into people's head, which happened in downtown San Diego. Someone got hit in the head, or in Balboa Park. Someone got shot by a bow and arrow. Someone got stabbed by a needle walking their dog. People these are things we should not have to fear, and that unites many people off the get-go.
Yeah.
So SDYR, like I said, we got this group of the Avengers together, and we're like, all right, guys, we're going to start releasing press releases. We're going to contact the media. We're going to be friends with the media. No more of this, F the media, this and this. We're going to build relationships with them. We're going to get our message.
Get your voice out there.
Yeah, we're going to get our message and our events out to them and give them news or give them a take, because they are always looking for things to write about.
Yeah.
And I think they're getting tired of writing about only Democrats. Truthfully. I mean, we've gotten all of this organic inquiry by NBC, CBS, ABC, this Union Tribune, Voice of San Diego. I mean, every major outlet here in San Diego, KUSI at a time, all of them have reached out to us to get our input because we're giving it. And I think that was something that gave and is giving a lot of people hope here in San Diego that are just sort of tired of watching this current leadership fail. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you leave them and you go to the far right fringes. Like, that's not even who we are. Yeah. So if you come over to the Young Republicans or the Republican Party in San Diego, you're not going to be met with far hard right antics or even philosophies. You're going to meet quite range. There are those, but you're going to meet a range of people that span many different elements of being a Republican. And that's why our tent is, when we say we're building our tent and are expanding it, it's like we're naturally doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note, too, that each of those founding members, although you all shared that goal and hustled to build it, I'm sure you guys disagree on small things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like this isn't another echo chamber to fight with the other echo chamber, right?
No. And that's what makes us strong, is that we can have these fruitful discussions amongst ourselves about, Yeah, what I post about online, I mean, look, I've been a strong critic of Trump over these last several years, and still criticize much of the approach and things. But we've got people that are fully Trump ready to go.
MAGA.
Yeah, and that's fine. And I think, I look at it as when all is said and done and Trump's out of the picture, where are you now? And that's where I don't say it like that, but that's how I get the conversation back to where it's like, okay, we are on the same page. You have a different flavor right now.
Yeah,
that's fine, but. If that's your only flavor, then there's a problem. Because then it's like, then you're kind of like North Korea, cult of personality, and putting all your eggs in one basket. That's like American. That's like anti-American. We're supposed to be the people, not the monarch or the leader.
Well, I think it's like, ideological or dogmatic, right? Mm-hmm. Where if it's like, okay, well, what are your thoughts on abortion? And if I were to just say, oh, well, I'm MAGA, so MAGA doesn't like that, so therefore I don't like that. That's not the good way to think about it, right?
No, and you should not filter your beliefs through someone else's lens.
Correct. And even if it's like, hey, if I identify as a Christian, I shouldn't just judge everything based off of that view. Maybe that's your base and your foundation, but you need to think about everything individualistically on an individual level, case by case. And even what you mentioned about Trump, like, I wasn't always a big fan of Trump, right? And me personally, I really like Vivek Ramaswamy.
Sure.
Like, he spoke to me, I mean, not
no,
literally, but his message spoke to me. I didn't know anything about politics. I was like, I like what the hell this guy's saying. It resonates with me. And, he's not the primary candidate. I believe in, conservative philosophy, Republican ideology in general compared to Democrats, right? So therefore, even if Trump's not my favorite, I'm going to vote for him over Kamala Harris, over Biden. Like, that's kind of how I view it, right?
You have to see, and that's a smart way of looking at it. That's looking at the larger picture and looking at the bigger domino effects of that. Whereas, like, people get so honed in on the personality of one person and don't realize, like, their administration is elected, not just them. So if you're against what this administration is proposing, probably not going to vote for the person just because you maybe like the person, because the institutions are what govern us, not the person.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. It comes down to, some of those nuances.
Yeah. And, and I didn't know that either about kind of the evolution of your engagement with the media, right? Because I saw Cynthia, talk on the news. I saw Cole talk on the news. I don't know if you have yourself.
Yeah.
It's cool to see that you guys did provide that voice. And something, I always joke about how 12, 13 months ago, I didn't know what a Republican or Democrat was, right? And I'm over here thinking like, okay, this group is saying this group is saying this, like, which one do I think, right? And who do I trust? Because they are saying completely opposite things sometimes, right? It's like, okay, one of them's lying possibly. And one of the factors that led me towards Republican figures and philosophy and all that, those are the people who are actually going on podcasts. And that's why I started a podcast, is because you can sit here, it's hard to bullshit for an hour and a half, 2 hours, but when I look at it, like,
that's a great
shit,
point.
Donald, even Ron DeSantis, like, he went on the PBD podcast. Vivek Ramaswamy's on all these podcasts. He goes right to the leftist media.
Right into the lion's den.
Yeah, and this dude is like articulating his point. When I go look at some of the Democrat figures, I don't see them on podcasts.
No.
And if I do, it's like chopped up and like completely scripted. And it's like,
it's almost like a skit.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, even if, let's say I hate both parties, I'm going to at least appreciate and respect the one that's going out there and defending their point of view and willing to go and argue their points against the other side, not just like, oh, I'll only get interviewed by you if you let me write the questions or if you let me dictate what the output looks like. It's like, I don't trust that.
No.
Whichever side you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge part of not, it's owning this philosophy, and again, not letting others define it for us. We have the responsibility of doing that, and that's why it's constantly like, we get stuff all the time like, oh, we're just a bunch of white kids that are
a bunch of racist trans folks.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, weird. Yeah, our president is Philip. Oh, our VP is. Oh, yeah, no, they're not even white. And our director. Oh no, that's not white. It's like we've got a lot of people not white, and it's interesting that that's the takeaway.
That's like why it's one of the reasons I like Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder, right? Because they're conservatives and they're Republicans, but they're black guys. So it's funny when it was a Bill Maher, he has his show, and I actually like Bill Maher,
too.
right?
Yeah.
And someone was on there, I think it was Charlemagne a couple years ago.
Oh, nice.
And Bill Maher was like talking about Thomas Sowell, and I think Charlemagne was like, well, that's just a white guy, and he's like, Thomas Sowell's a black guy. And it's like, oh, and he like fucking froze. You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, wait, that contradicts my, ideology. And so,
Exactly.
I like those kind of.
And what's exciting about, and just to piggyback on that, what's exciting about what we're doing at the San Diego Young Republicans is that we are embracing the massive overlap of Republicanism with these cultural communities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my girlfriend is Hispanic. Her entire family is Republican. Not because of me. I met them that way.
Yeah.
Right? All Republican. My best friends growing up, 3 black kids, their family's Republican. Right? I didn't do any of that. They came to me with these values, and they may not have called themselves that, but I was like, well, dude, you're upset about this, you care about this, you want that, you're Republican.
Yeah.
And it first, for at least one of them, was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, dude, this is Republican values. Do not lose track based on the national mudslinging of what it means.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the re-articulating and going out there, going into the media, going onto podcasts, speaking about who we are. Because you're right. How many local Democrats in San Diego are putting on this much effort to be on open conversations about who we are, what we're doing, what we're about? None of them. They don't feel they need to. And that's a kind of entitlement that is dangerous, because they feel no accountability or no need to be accountable. They don't need to be vulnerable or be asked questions or let people see how their brain works in a podcast form, which you get to see someone, how they're spinning their wheels or how they're processing stuff. Whereas everything is so cookie cutter and choreographed. It's like, it's disingenuous. And it again, we're not going to let the future of San Diego be determined by some folks in Alabama.
Yeah.
And I always refer to that, no disrespect to Alabama, but again, completely different group of people. And re-educating people on Republican values from the San Diego perspective is why San Diego Young Republicans has grown 650% in membership, has grown over 600% in our finances, is, like I said, mentioned earlier, we're on all the major media outlets. There's a ton of enthusiasm. It's not going to happen overnight. None of us expected it to. This is actually growing faster than we anticipated, but it's organic, and it's happening because people are, those who are identifying as Democrat are beginning to start to identify themselves as American now. And they're looking at, okay, well, who do I blame here? Who can I point the finger to my city? And they look and they say, oh, the whole council are Democrats. Every single one of those members of the city of San Diego are Democrat. Okay, well, who's the mayor? Oh, the mayor is the Democrat. Okay, well, who are the supervisors of the county? Oh, the chairwoman is a Democrat. Oh, the majority of the chair is a Democrat. Oh, well, who is the state? Oh, the state Senate is majority Democrat. Oh, the state assembly is majority Democrat, and the state is governed by a Democrat governor. So I've seen it done where Democrats will still blame Republicans for the failures of California.
The border.
It's beautiful. It's irony. It's beautiful. It's funny to me. I have to laugh at it, otherwise I'd lose my mind, because it's like you literally have entire organizations with tens of billions of dollars making these policies, and they're all coming from your side of the aisle, your philosophy, your approach, and yet it's somehow Republicans' fault, or it's not yours, not your accountability. And I think the public is starting to, they have nowhere else to blame but inward, and I think a lot of jumping ship is happening. I'm sure you saw stats. Republicans are growing the most in registration in California.
Yeah, young men are leaning conservative.
That's a huge, and that's another thing that the
That
TikTok
gives me hope.
Yeah, the TikTok generation is starting. There's those who are being absolutely bombarded with propaganda all day, every day. Ironically, from TikTok, Chinese-owned, kind of surveillance program. All of that is starting to have a natural pushback, and that's what you're saying. These new generations of kids are like, they're a little raw. They're like, fuck that.
Yeah.
Like, no. And sometimes they're mean.
They're the ones fighting the system now.
And that now it's like Gen Z push to implement the system. Millennials, we introduced it. Gen Z pushed to implement it. Now Gen the Gen Alpha is sort of like counterculture to that, which I think as millennials that are disenfranchised, and even the Gen Xers who are, trust me, are disenfranchised, I think we embrace that. I think that's and that's what gives me excitement to reach out to those younger generations coming up, is because that frustration can be honed in a very productive way at a time where it's most like it's what's the word?
We're in need of it right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
this is the
timing.
best time to jump in an arena that is lacking a lot of that perspective, that fight.
Yeah. And, I always mention this story because, me on my journey, like I said, I have my career, I have all my responsibilities. I wanted to build something that, from the ground up that I could be proud of, that helps other people, that's noble. Jordan Peterson always talks about the more noble your goal, the more fulfillment you get out of it.
100%.
So I can start to point myself in the right direction there, right? So, hey, I like talking to people, I like learning and all this stuff. I like soccer, I like tattoos, right? Like, why don't I do a podcast about that? Well, it's not as noble as success psychology, philosophy, wisdom, helping people get their shit together, right? So that's why I tweaked my podcast to be in that realm. And another, selfishly speaking, I also think that right now there's a massive demand for it. Right? Because
there's a
I
market.
think people, exactly. There's a market. And I, studied econ, and that was my bachelor's, right? I'm no expert, but I studied enough of it, right?
See it, yeah.
There's a massive demand for it right now. I think that there's, as Vivek always says, a spiritual hole that people are looking to fill. And you can either fill it with social justice Marxism, which about half the country is, or you can fill it with,
intrinsic values.
Yeah, exactly. Like foundational values and, knowledge and, but let's get back to humanity here. Right. So, it's funny that you mentioned that because, that's why I kind of tweaked my podcast to be in this focus. I think naturally that's how I ended up connecting with yourself and the San Diego Young Republicans. And to tie that back to, we were talking about media involvement and having a voice for ourselves, so that the left doesn't just say, "Oh, conservative means like you hate black people."
This is who you are, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And think about it. In the past 2.5 weeks, San Diego Young Republicans has now done 3 podcasts, this being the 3rd.
Yeah.
So you're not, and I challenge people, go through all of my content, every second of a word that I've said and I've posted. I've never said anything racist. I've never said anything transphobic. My mother was an immigrant. I'm firm on strict immigration policy and processes and secure border. My mom was a fucking refugee. Like there, whoa, that breaks the mold for some people, right? So having that voice out there, for these young kids out there who are look at who's not afraid to defend what they're saying, right?
Dispelling those myths. And that's the part I have a huge passion about that because I embody a lot of it, because there's the stereotypes, white, straight, male.
Yeah.
That's about all you're going to get accurate, right? Because my journey is very complicated, and it's also seasoned in many ways. I've gone through many trenches and things, but you're not going to get that if you just snap judging. And just to speak on, you're coming on to the scene in a time where we did, San Diego had, and sorry to throw you under the bus, guys, but KUSI was a very, very locally embedded, grounded counterculture news organization that was challenging our local officials, interviewing them, following up with them, investigating them, interviewing community members, going to their rallies, like really embroiled themselves in the local community. Well, they got bought out by a national org that is with Fox 5, and now they're just a regurgitated national outlet, and they don't really do that kind of
local effort.
No, none of that anymore. And so there is a ginormous void that has occurred because the rest is all far left. Even Fox 5, get the fuck out. It's, you're not reporting criticism on our local officials. You're aiding them. And watch any of their reports. It's all aiding.
It's tribal.
It is. And it also, it's not even the perspective. It's not even like Fox 5 doesn't even give the counter perspective as much as it does the perspective. And that's not, I think when we're talking about the investigative side of reporting and stuff, you need to have that. And with KUSI gone really and not doing that, people are going to start coming to things that, especially if you brand it around what's happening locally and your place in California, San Diego, the United States, and you start making the conversations relevant to locals, this is going to continue to grow because there is none of that right now. It's all leftist defense mechanisms that are just out here justifying the failures of our society.
Yeah.
Whereas, we need to have more of this and, getting elected officials to sit on this freaking couch and just open up and talk about and humanize. And, a lot of people don't want to humanize one another because it makes it harder to be an asshole.
Yeah.
And I get that. But it helps us all when we can understand each other from that human perspective. And that's why it's important to understand philosophies like Marxism and Howard Zinn, and because these people, it's emotion. These people feel a type of despair, and I empathize with a lot of their feelings because there are some shady shit that happened. But if we every day define our lives by just the negative stuff in any respect, political or personal, it accumulates and makes us continually miserable. So same goes for a country. You keep pointing out and keep talking about all of the things that happen that we can't do anything about. Well, then
you're just complaining.
All we're doing is living in that frame of mind, not the fact that we went to the moon, invented the internet, created, like all these things that we should be excited about as having that American spirit that is projected around the world. It's no, we're evil, and it's like, well, no society lasts long calling themselves evil. So
yeah, and it's almost like, you almost have to start off with, like, do you want to improve, right? That's why I always go back to the gas prices and, reference, as well as, like, do you want to be in a better mood more of the time? Like, let's at least, agree on where the direction is. If we agree we want to keep improving, then okay, that means we shouldn't have all this DEI policy or socialism or communism or restricted freedom and all this stuff, and if you do want to improve, okay, well, who's done the best job at that? I mean, America, right? Yeah. Like our U.S. Constitution, British common law, even before that, sovereignty of the individual, innocent.
Show me another society that has progressed like that.
Exactly.
In a short amount of time that it has.
And it's because of our unique Western values that is why we progressed so much further than these other places, right? So if we want to keep that going, then we need to not get rid of the Constitution, not say, that's out, out with the old, in with the new. We can't,
No, and that's, I think in our lifetime, the conversation around the Constitution is going to become more relevant. Yeah. I think there's going to be more people in our age group when they accumulate more power that are going to challenge the Constitution in a very deliberate way. And it's hard for me to completely throw out the interest in something like that because we are, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll probably fact check, but we are the longest standing unrevised constitution for a republic in the world, right? I think the average constitution is updated every 15 years around the world for democracies, and we haven't touched ours in like 200. So, or, rewritten the entire thing 200, but amended it in like decades.
Yeah.
So there's going to be, I think, discussions in the future of reconvening a more updated constitution, which is going to require quite comprehensive discussion, because if it's not, then we're really, it's just a scary, you're reopening the fabric of our country, and how we redesign it is
opens up risk,
huge risk. And I think that's also why there's been a hesitancy to just leave as is. But with the way that Democrats are going about wanting to stack courts, right? Why do they want to do that? Because they want things to go in their favor. That's not how the court system is supposed to work.
Yeah, they want to stay in power.
And that creates a hyper politicized, like, I mean, forget check and balances, right? Which the intended that was the intended role of the different branches, to counter each other. But when they're, there's two ills of both parties right now. I would say the ill of the Republican side is the tendency to want to empower a figurehead, which is, authoritarian. And the left has the urge and inclination to overly empower the institutions, which is also, authoritarianism. And so I've read some great work on the inclination of Americans to be authoritarian, and it comes out of desperation. It comes out of feeling despair and feeling there's no more community and we need a savior. And one, it's either going to be the organization saving us or the figurehead, but both move us towards like North Korea.
Yeah.
And again, it's my benchmark of remembering like, okay, how did we get here? It's because you lose hope, you lose quality of life, you lose your guns, you lose your property, you lose your voice, you lose, and then it just becomes like you're a factory robot. And
and they say that the political pendulum swings both ways, right? And I always reference James Lindsay. He's in my view, the leading expert on Marxist ideology, right? And he's anti-communist, right?
Sure.
He fights against it. And he always talks about, hey, we've swung super far to the left. This is this woke neo-Marxism. Like, here's all these problems with it, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's good that we start to swing back towards the center, but we don't want to swing too far to the right. And that would be like a Christian nationalism, right? And that's like, okay. And there are a lot of people who were a fan of James Lindsay who now are like, man, he's gone crazy. What are you talking about? Like, no, Christian nationalism, like, that's our roots. This is the best thing for us. And it's like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? And so he's lost some of his base, but he's like, hey, guys, like, I'm sticking to what I know based on the literature. Like, that would be swinging too far in the other direction. Like, you would just bring your own totalitarian state with your own values, like that. It will just create the problem. Yeah.
I mean, you've heard of horseshoe theory, right?
I have, yes.
It's the same thing.
And that's why our Western progressives are now siding with radical Islamists, right? Because they had happened, because radical Islamists are far right technically, right? They're a theocracy and want to keep everything based on Sharia law and all that stuff. Why the hell are they buddies with progressive, Westerners?
Exactly. It ties back into that. Need for control and
So I think a good spot to wrap up. I like to always ask my guests, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of America? And what advice would you give to a young American man or woman, like today, literally?
Yeah, my advice has been something that I have continued to tell myself since I was 16, which is get involved. The world is run by those who show up. I have found that to be more accurate than I want it to be. But it's also that empowering feeling of I can do something to change stuff, because I have not just witnessed my own singular voice shape government direction, but I've seen what my singular voice can do to inspire others, to build coalition, to build more change. And that to me is just by showing up, being in the room, putting yourself in the uncomfortable spots. I've done that and continue to do that. And I think it's benefiting the communities that I'm striving to improve by doing that. And it's, it's something that,
I think it'll help the kids find their own purpose and meaning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you're struggling and I agree with that, like, okay, if you're struggling to pay your bills and for food, focus on that. But if you have that under control, the next form of establishing meaning for yourself will be getting involved and trying to help other people, whether that's build a family. Once you have that, then build a community.
Exactly.
Once you have that, then work your way outward.
And I would also say, even if you don't identify as a Republican or anything on the right, and maybe you are considered yourself liberal or progressive or whatnot, I would still invite you to contact me or SDYR and come to an event. I would still encourage someone to expose themselves to what we're doing, who we are, what we're about, because I think a lot of people are going to be baffled and are going to find themselves in a cognitive dissonance by what they think we are, who they think we're about, what we think we're about, what they think we're about, and what we are about. So definitely getting involved. And the beautiful thing about politics is there's so many ways to do it. Not everyone has to be crazy like me and start speaking at the podium, calling out your mayor, and then running for office, right? I kind of went hardcore early on, learned a lot of do's and don'ts. But there are other ways. We have people that have gotten involved in being the graphic designer of our org, SDYR. And just based on their graphic designs has improved not just our social media outlook, but has encouraged people to look more into us, because it's interesting. Wow, they're creating cool graphics, something simple like that. But that person's contribution digitally is improving the community because it's changing people's patterns of how they interpret our messaging.
Yeah.
Or people that are good with videos, creating videos of themselves and being, being vulnerable. I'm a big fan of Gary Vee. Content is king. And I think when you put out content, it only helps provide direction for yourself and others, because it shows also your evolution of thought, like I'm sure your podcasts will do over time. But it also allows somebody to feel that it's not too late. You know, people come into this arena at age 40 and they're brand new and they're excited like a kid. So I look at kids that are young and I think, you know, just because you don't care about politics doesn't mean politics doesn't care about you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something to really send home and remember that all these decisions that are made by these people that you may not even know who they are directly impact your quality of life, your access to resources, and how you progress or degress in society. It comes down to the decisions that these people make. So I would say getting involved is, as cliche as it sounds, it really is that Twilight Zone magical piece you need to figure out the rest.
Yeah. And your hopes and dreams for the future of San Diego and for the country and the world?
Yeah, I think here in San Diego, we have given the way we as SDYR approach politics, I think we have an opportunity to make a lot of strives in unity. And I don't say that in a way that sacrifices anything, but we need to stop demonizing the word compromise. And we need to start looking at how, you know, we can both win on issues if we have conversations about the basics. And I think here in San Diego, we live in the most expensive city in the country. We have a severe housing crisis. Democrats are not the only people who care about housing. I think reestablishing the fact that there's a lot of things we all care about and building on that. And for San Diego, I think, again, like I just said, there's a couple of issues that Republicans and Democrats can get on the same page on, and we should focus on unifying behind that. Surveillance. Republicans and Democrats don't like hyper over surveillance. Those are issues that we can come together on. Mm-hmm. Housing proposals. I think there's a lot of irresponsible proposals that happen and a lot of missed opportunities. Well, let's find out where we can build better in not ways that just doesn't make sense for the city outline or layout. So I there's a lot of things I want to see happen in San Diego, but that's why I invest so much of my time, energy, and focus, because I think we are in such a unique city in the country and have an opportunity to not be so disgusting in our politics at the end of the day, and can have adult conversations. I want to see San Diego as the adults in the room of the country of children in many respects. So that's how I look at that. California, my hopes and dreams are that we really start balancing the power. I think we're at an extreme level where it's not even healthy discourse. It's almost like you need to send in a full down ballot of Republicans to even get a smidget of accountability. Because right now there is none. It's supermajority everywhere. And nothing is going to be followed through, because if they're all on the hook for it, they're not going to take responsibility. So definitely changing the power dynamics. Accountability. I mean, that should be, again, an American versus government official relationship, social contract. It should not just be, well, they're a Democrat, I'm going to let them spend as they please and destroy things as they want. But if a Republican comes out and says these things, I'm going to be in the streets. Like, no, be in the streets for your own people, causing you the same issues you call Republicans, call them out on. So, but that doesn't happen if we just are shit posting and yelling at each other. We need to have more open conversations and humanizing each other.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then for the United States, I think, again, it's everything on a micro can be translated into the macro. And I think that valuing Socratic seminars and discourse and challenging each other's predispositions, because a lot of people don't want to admit that they don't know who they are. And I think people kind of put things to fillers. And the reason I say this is because when you start to ask them about those things, there's not much depth to it, which means they've just filled in what they've been told to fill in and hope that's good enough to get by. But that's not how life is. And I think we need to have those hard conversations, but in an adult manner that doesn't resort to, making fun of each other or calling out, unchangeable things like, no, I can't change that I'm white, I'm sorry, or a male or straight. So can we put that aside, or is that going to prevent this discourse? Because if that is, then I don't want to talk to you. It's like, it's futile. So I think choosing battles correctly, but finding those willing to have the battle, and doing it in a good faith way, will bring out much better results.
And for the viewers, where can people find you? How do you prefer they get to know you and your brand?
Yeah, well, hopefully they got through this podcast, and I think I've been very open and transparent about myself here. So hopefully this is a good way of hooking people in. But I'm all over social media. First and last name, Zack Gianino, ZackGianino. I'm mostly on X, pretty active there, but on Instagram, Facebook. I try to be I pride myself on being accessible and transparent, and no matter if it's you sending me a middle finger, I'll engage, to my own detriment sometimes. But, I think it's important to have conversations even when they start off like raw or, not fun. But yeah, so I'm very accessible, and I would encourage anybody to reach out.
I love it, man. And yeah, I mean, I'm newer to this world. It's been about a year of me doing this podcast, but I've learned more than I ever could have expected. And just, as a San Diegan, as an American, I appreciate everything that you're doing for the community and your fellow man, right? I appreciate your humility. You don't strike me as someone who thinks that they have all the answers. No. You're not afraid to have a peaceful conversation with anyone who's open to it. I'm not afraid to defend what you believe to be true. And again, I would imagine if you learn something new and you'll change your perspective.
Absolutely.
So, I just, as a human, I appreciate that. As a man, I appreciate any man who, handles his responsibilities and stands strong. And I think, both of us care about the younger generation. And I think we need more strong men and women to lead by example to the younger generation, so they can figure out how to stand up straight with their shoulders back and, not just go with the crowd, even if it's easier, especially if it's easier. Exactly. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing your time and experiences and wisdom. Of course. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation we have.
No, I appreciate this opportunity. You've been an incredible facilitator of a discussion that, it can go down 17-hour podcast rabbit holes. So I appreciate you kind of keeping things on track. And this service, I'm sure you see its benefit and how it highlights incredibly important discussions, but it truly provides a pillar for those that are afraid of stepping in first. And they first come across, reaching out to me by first watching something like this, or reaching out to you after first watching this. So I encourage you to continue. I applaud your efforts. It's one of these things that you will even appreciate even more in 5-10 years. But right now it's an honor to be here with you in this journey. And I look forward to continuing on beyond the podcast on making this community, a better environment for all of us.
Love it, man. Until next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sweet.